"I got fired today," I told him, my voice trembling as I set down the grocery bags heavier than usual, even though I only bought pasta and eggs. Justin didn't look up from his laptop, fingers still tapping like he was conducting a symphony more important than me. "Of course you did," he muttered, not even pausing to ask how or why or if I was okay. "You've always had a hard time keeping up." I stood there in my heels, coat still on, wondering when he'd last looked at me like I was something more than an obligation. Before I continue narrating the story of Kimberly Hart, please consider giving this video a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel. 3 hours earlier, I had sat in my office, the corner one with the glass wall view, holding the envelope with my new title, Executive Director of Strategy. My team had brought cupcakes, my boss gave a speech, and I cried in the bathroom afterward because I'd worked 5 years for that promotion. But I didn't tell Justin. I couldn't. Not after what he said the last time I got a raise, accusing me of trying to out-earn him like it was some kind of crime. I had loved this man once, deeply and fiercely, but somewhere between his third failed business and his mother moving in temporarily, something shifted. It was subtle at first, small jabs about my long hours, silence when I mentioned work milestones, and constant praise for Heather, his mother, who, quote, ran a household better than any executive ever could. Then came the sudden need to reevaluate our finances, which meant him asking to oversee the bills I'd paid for 6 years. I didn't push back when he moved into the guest room, claiming it had better lighting for Zoom calls. And when I found my favorite cashmere sweater in the donation pile, I convinced myself it was a mistake. That night, I made his favorite chicken marsala from scratch, the way Heather taught me, and he barely touched it. "I'm not really hungry," he said, scrolling through something on his phone, the screen tilted away like always. I sat across from him, wondering what it would take for him to ask how I was doing. But he didn't. He just finished his wine, set the glass down too hard, and told me his mother would be extending her stay until things stabilize. What things? I didn't ask. When I finally slipped into bed, the sheets cold and untouched on his side, I stared at the ceiling and rehearsed the lie again. I got fired. I mouthed it silently, trying to make the words feel real. Would he finally wrap his arms around me like he used to? Would he say we'd get through it together? Or would he just shrug and let his mother call the shots? By morning, I had a plan. I dressed like someone who'd lost everything. Messy bun, no makeup, an old hoodie from college. I even skipped my morning espresso to make the illusion more convincing. Justin was in the kitchen, sipping the coffee I brewed, leaning against the counter like a king surveying his kingdom. "Didn't you have a meeting today?" he asked, finally glancing up at me. I shrugged. "Doesn't matter, I don't work there anymore." His eyes narrowed, the mug pausing midair. "Wait, you're serious?" I nodded slowly, letting my shoulders sag as if I was carrying the weight of failure. "They said the department's being downsized," I added, avoiding his gaze. I was one of the first to go. Instead of comforting me, he smiled. It wasn't wide or obvious, just a flicker of something dark and smug that crossed his face like a shadow. "Well," he said, setting down the mug, "maybe now we can focus on what really matters around here." I blinked, unsure what he meant. "Like getting this place in order," he continued. "You've been so distracted with your little job. It's no wonder things have fallen apart." I stared at him, my heart pounding with a strange mix of rage and heartbreak. "You've always said you wanted to be a team," I whispered. "And now that I'm struggling, you're what? Gloating." He waved me off like I was being hysterical. "Don't twist things, Kim. I'm just saying, maybe this is a sign. It's time to reevaluate your priorities." As I sat at the breakfast table, picking at cold toast, Heather entered the room like she owned the floor beneath her feet. "Oh, sweetheart," she said with that sugary condescension she had perfected. "Justin told me the news. I always said that company didn't value you properly." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She poured herself coffee into my mug, the one Justin gave me for our 5th anniversary, and took a long sip as if claiming it for herself. "It's good you'll have more time around here," she added. God knows this apartment needs a woman's touch. The rage built inside me like rising water behind a dam. That evening, I retreated to the park 3 blocks away, sitting on a bench with my real phone while the burner I kept at home continued the act. My team had sent over congratulations on Slack, and my assistant had asked if I'd like flowers delivered to my home or office. I told her neither. I couldn't risk any cracks in the story. Not yet. If I wanted the truth from Justin, I had to keep playing the part of a woman defeated. The next morning, I told him I was applying for jobs at local retail stores and temp agencies. He nodded approvingly, as if I'd finally learned my lesson. "Pride doesn't pay bills," he said. "You should remember that." I wanted to throw my espresso in his face. Instead, I smiled weakly and said I'd try the Career Center after lunch. Meanwhile, I was managing a $10 million rebrand for our international division. On day 3, I found the first clue. A torn envelope addressed to Justin from a real estate firm in Queens, tucked under a stack of his old startup brochures. It listed an apartment showing scheduled for the following week. When I asked him about it that night, he claimed it was just a networking event. "In an apartment building?" I asked. "Some investors meet in unconventional places," he said, eyes too steady. Something wasn't adding up, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the real betrayal surfaced. The next morning, Heather took over the kitchen as though I no longer existed in it. She moved my spice rack, rearranged my pantry, and labeled plastic bins with masking tape like we were prepping for nuclear fallout. "You'll thank me later," she chirped, setting my favorite French press on the top shelf, just out of my reach. Justin stood nearby, nodding as she dictated storage plans like a general leading a domestic invasion. "Mom's just trying to help," he said when I glared at the newly exiled espresso maker. I watched her set up a budgeting spreadsheet at the dining table, the same table where I'd once hosted strategy meetings over takeout and whiteboards. "You know," she said pointedly, "maybe this is the reset you needed." I blinked at her, unsure which version of the insult I should respond to first. Women today get so caught up in proving something that they forget their real worth. I smiled faintly, as if her words hadn't just sliced through years of hard work and sacrifice. After she left the room, I opened my laptop, carefully turning the screen away from the hallway. My actual spreadsheet, tracking the leak of marital trust, not grocery expenses, was getting longer. I'd started a second tab labeled Unexplained Activity and entered everything: the Queen's apartment letter, the missing bottle of vintage wine from my collection, and a necklace receipt from a boutique I'd never stepped foot in. My hands trembled slightly as I typed, but I kept going because I had to. I needed to know what I was really looking at. A man falling out of love, or a man building a life without me. I thought about confronting him, just laying it all out and demanding the truth. But something inside me whispered that the truth alone wasn't enough. I needed proof. Not just of infidelity or deception, but of intent, of premeditation, because I could feel it in my bones. This wasn't an accident. This was a coordinated unraveling of everything we'd built. And Heather wasn't just a bystander. She was co-pilot. 2 nights later, he left his phone on the coffee table when he went to shower. It was locked, but I remembered the passcode. Our anniversary date, ironically enough. I didn't hesitate. My fingers flew across the screen, heart thundering with each swipe. Hidden beneath a folder named Finance Docs was a chat thread with a woman named Riley, all hearts, baby bump emojis, and phrases like, "Can't wait to be home with you and the little bean." My stomach twisted as I opened a video attachment labeled Week 16. It showed a woman with auburn hair and clear blue eyes, resting her hand on a visible baby bump. "We heard the heartbeat again today," she said into the camera. "I wish you'd been there, but I understand. Soon we'll all be together." She ended the video by blowing a kiss toward the screen, toward my husband. I didn't cry. Not then, not even later, when I lay awake staring at the ceiling and listening to him snore softly from the guest room. I felt something colder than sadness, heavier than grief. It was a calm clarity, the kind you only get when the fog of denial clears for good. Riley was pregnant, and Justin was planning a second life with her and their child. The next day, I called in sick and followed him after he left with his laptop bag and thermos. He didn't go to any co-working space or client meeting. He went straight to a small brownstone in Astoria, where Riley opened the door in fuzzy socks and a smile meant only for him. He kissed her belly first, then her mouth, and disappeared inside. I took photos from across the street, each shutter click tightening the knot in my chest. I waited an hour before leaving, because I needed to be sure this wasn't a dream or a misunderstanding. Back at home, I heated leftover soup and stared into the pot while Heather commented on my posture. "Saching doesn't help you feel better about yourself," she offered without looking up from her Sudoku puzzle. "Confidence starts with discipline, dear." I nodded vaguely, wondering how she'd react if she knew her son was planning to install his mistress into my apartment. If she'd always known. If she'd been helping him set the stage for my quiet erasure all along. That night, I created a new file on my desktop, titled Exit Plan. It had sections: legal contacts, asset protection, emotional preparedness. I wasn't just going to leave, I was going to expose him. Quietly, thoroughly, and in a way that no amount of charm or lies could repair. My first move was to separate our finances. I opened a new bank account at a credit union across town and transferred half of our joint savings. My half, carefully calculated. I closed the shared credit card and canceled the authorized user access he'd been exploiting. Heather tried to protest when the grocery card got declined, but I feigned ignorance. "Weird," I said. "Must be a glitch with the bank." The more I uncovered, the more meticulous I became. I downloaded backup files of every email he'd sent from our shared laptop, including one to his brother asking for help, transitioning Riley into the apartment. I started recording conversations with Heather when she made passive-aggressive comments about how some women weren't cut out for marriage. I cataloged everything. If he wanted a new life, he could have it, but not by stealing mine in the process. I wouldn't go quietly into that soft, wife-shaped shadow he was trying to banish me into. Then came the kicker, an email chain from 3 months ago with a divorce lawyer. He hadn't filed anything yet, but the drafts were there. Subject lines like "how to handle uncooperative spouse" and "best timeline for moving in a new partner." I scrolled through the correspondence numb, reading his words about Kimberly's recent instability and career setbacks as reasons for full asset reassignment. He'd written my own fabricated firing into his legal justification. My lie had become his weapon, and now I had all the ammo I needed. It was a Wednesday when I scheduled a consultation with a divorce attorney under my maiden name. Her office was tucked inside a glass tower downtown, the kind of place that smelled like leather and quiet power. She greeted me with a firm handshake and eyes that didn't blink when I laid out the situation. "This is not a divorce," I clarified. "Not yet. But if it becomes one, I want to be the one holding the pen." She listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes in a slim black notebook. I handed over the USB drive I'd prepared, filled with documentation, recordings, financial records, even a timeline of when Justin's tone toward me had started to shift. "Smart," she murmured when she saw the labeled folders. "This is enough to win any war, but it's also enough to end it before it starts." I didn't want vengeance, I realized in that moment. I wanted control. At home, Heather complained about the rising cost of produce, as if that justified her preference for microwaving vegetables to death. Justin barely looked at me anymore, except when I feigned panic over job interviews that didn't exist. "Well," he'd say, "at least you're trying now." The audacity of a man who planned to discard me judging my efforts never stopped making my stomach churn. But I kept the act going, because the show wasn't over yet. One morning I told him I was going to Boston to stay with my sister for a while and get back on my feet. His eyes lit up with unguarded relief. "You should, really," he said. "Take time to reflect. This might be good for us." I nodded slowly, biting the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. I booked a fake ticket, printed an itinerary, and even packed a suitcase with clothes I didn't care about. Heather helped zip it up, her smile tight and victorious. "Distance brings clarity," she said as she patted my shoulder like I was the family dog being sent to obedience school. Justin ordered me an Uber without asking if I needed one. "Take care," he said, leaning down to kiss my forehead like a priest giving last rites. I let him, because the next time he touched me, it would be through the pages of a subpoena. The moment the elevator doors closed, I went straight back to the leasing office. Ms. Brennan, the property manager, greeted me with surprise and then immediate concern as I slid the evidence folder across her desk. "I know the lease is in Justin's name," I said, "but everything in that folder will explain why that needs to change." She took her time reading, her brows rising as she flipped through each document. "This is extensive," she said finally, "and damning." By the end of the meeting, she agreed to begin lease reassignment under grounds of constructive occupancy fraud. I'd paid every bill, after all, and the unit's entire furnishing inventory matched receipts with my name. Justin, she said, would receive formal notice by Friday, 2 days before I returned from Boston. I left the office feeling lighter than I had in months, like I'd finally stopped dragging dead weight behind me. Outside, the air smelled like possibility and espresso from the cart on the corner, and for once, I bought a cup without worrying whether he'd mock the price. Back at the apartment, I waited until I knew he was at Riley's before letting myself in. Heather was still out, probably tormenting a barista for too much foam. I walked through the living room slowly, letting the silence press around me. This was my space, and I needed to reclaim it, starting with the things they'd erased. I lit a candle he always said gave him a headache, and opened the blinds he claimed caused a glare on his laptop. In the bedroom, I placed a fresh set of sheets on my bed and replaced the photos he'd taken down. Gone were the neutral prints Heather favored. In their place, I framed my diploma, a picture of me at my last product launch, and a black and white photo of my sister and me at the beach. I needed reminders of who I was before he chipped away at me with criticism disguised as concern. I moved every piece of his clothing into 2 suitcases and shoved them in the hall closet. The guest room was no longer his sanctuary. It was now a storage unit waiting for pickup. That evening, I cooked pasta with expensive cheese and opened a bottle of wine he hated. I curled up on the couch, watching a documentary about women CEOs, while his browser history filled with nursery decor and baby name lists. I'd installed remote tracking software on his devices 3 weeks ago, the same week he congratulated himself for helping me with a job lead. Now I could see every search, every text, every email. He'd told Riley I was emotionally unstable and that Heather was managing the fallout. He truly believed he'd won. But the closer I got to the final act, the less I wanted to just leave. I wanted him to see it. I wanted him to stand in the wreckage of his scheme and realize that the woman he underestimated had quietly flipped the entire script. I wanted him to understand that he was not a mastermind. He was a footnote, and that revelation had to happen face to face. So I scheduled a fake call for my new job. I set the scene perfectly. My old laptop open, a staged call on speaker, and my boss's voice played from an audio app. Heather overheard it while walking past and immediately narrowed her eyes. "I thought you said you weren't working yet," she asked, drying a dish she never washed. I smiled and shrugged. Some people just get lucky. That night, Justin came home to a cooked dinner, candles lit, and soft jazz playing, the version of me he hadn't seen in months. He blinked like he'd walked into the wrong apartment. "What's all this?" he asked, setting down his bag. "Just dinner," I replied. "Figured I'd thank you for your patience while I get my act together." He looked at me with something resembling suspicion. We sat and ate mostly in silence. He complimented the chicken, and I complimented his ability to act like he wasn't cheating on me with a pregnant woman named Riley. I didn't say it out loud, of course. Not yet. That moment was coming, and when it did, he wouldn't have anywhere to run. Thursday morning came wrapped in clouds and fog, a fitting metaphor for the conversation I was about to initiate. I brewed 2 cups of coffee and placed his at the seat where he always sat, next to the window he claimed gave him migraines. Heather had gone to her weekly prayer group, which I knew was actually brunch with her high society friends who gossiped behind donation slips. Justin wandered in wearing joggers and that smug half-smile he thought made him charming. "Wow," he said, lifting the mug. "You're domestic again." I stirred my own coffee, letting the silence do most of the talking. "Been thinking a lot about the future," I said, watching him over the rim of my cup. He was scrolling through his phone, nodding like he was listening, though I knew he wasn't. "About where we're headed, financially and emotionally." That got his attention. His thumb froze mid-scroll, and he looked up, guarded. "Things are unstable," he said, as if reading from a manual. "We need to make practical decisions." I nodded and played along, pretending to be unsure and eager to please. "Exactly. That's why I've been thinking, maybe it's time we talk about shared responsibilities. Transparency, you know?" His brow furrowed, suspicious, but trying not to show it. "You mean like a budget?" he asked, and I nearly laughed at the irony. "Yes," I said slowly, "but also expectations. What do we owe each other? What's the real plan here?" He hesitated, then reached for his phone again, deflecting. "We'll talk later. Mike wants to meet early about something big." Mike didn't exist, of course. Mike was the fictional investor Justin had invented months ago to excuse late nights and fake meetings. As soon as he left, I called the lawyer again. "I want to move up the timeline," I said. "I've secured the lease. I've documented everything. I want him served while he's still wearing the smile he gave Riley." My attorney agreed, noting that we'd already satisfied every requirement for grounds of divorce with cause. Meanwhile, I started quietly transferring valuable belongings to a storage unit across town. My art prints, the espresso machine, my grandmother's jewelry, and the Italian cookware I'd saved for during my first big bonus. I took photos of the apartment after each removal, labeling which items were mine, and sent them to my paralegal for record. Each time I locked that storage unit, it felt like another lock sealing the door on this chapter. And every trip back to the apartment became lighter. That weekend, I told Heather I was considering returning to school. She looked up from her crossword with thinly veiled disgust. "For what?" she asked. "You already failed once." I smiled, pretending her words didn't land. "I just think learning something new might help me rebuild." She leaned forward, clasping her hands like she was a wise elder bestowing guidance. "Some women don't need to rebuild," she said softly. "Some women need to step aside." My grip on the wine glass tightened so hard I thought it might crack. "Interesting," I replied. "I guess some women think replacing a person is as simple as flipping a mattress." She didn't respond, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Uncertainty, maybe. I spent that night going through every drawer Justin hadn't already claimed. In his home office, I found more than I expected: a second phone, used mostly for texting Riley, a list of baby name combinations, and a sketch of a crib setup labeled Emma's Corner. Emma? I hadn't seen that name before. A third woman? The messages told me everything. Emma was a backup plan, a side project, a friend who didn't know about Riley. He called her his mental reset and promised her a vacation to, quote, celebrate the big change. I found hotel reservations under his name, scheduled for the weekend. I told him I'd be in Boston, 2 queen beds. He'd written in a note to her, "For appearances, then we'll burn the night down." I took screenshots and sent them straight to my lawyer. By Sunday night, I was done pretending. The plan was set, every detail polished. The process server was confirmed. The building's security had been briefed. All that remained was the reveal, and it would unfold exactly how he deserved. When Monday morning arrived, I dressed with deliberate care. Pencil skirt, silk blouse, the heels he once called overcompensating. I wore red lipstick and my promotion ring, the one I bought myself after the company stock hit its target. I looked like success wrapped in elegance, and I wanted him to feel every inch of the woman he'd dismissed. He walked through the door at 8:43 a.m., juggling his keys and a coffee cup. When he saw me seated at the kitchen table, legs crossed, folder in hand, he slowed. "You're dressed," he said dumbly. "I thought you were still in Boston." I smiled, cool and composed. Change of plans. I opened the folder and slid the first page across the table, his name at the top, stamped with "Petition for Divorce with Cause." His eyes scanned it, blinking faster as comprehension dawned. "What is this?" he asked, voice rising. "This is reality," I said, "and reality's been knocking for weeks." He laughed nervously, like this was all a joke he hadn't heard the punchline to yet. "You're overreacting." We've just been going through a rough patch. I reached for my phone and pressed play on a recording of Heather's voice. Some women need to step aside, she said clearly. Emma's corner will be perfect by the window. He paled instantly, face folding into panic. You were recording us? He whispered. I recorded everything, I replied, standing slowly. Every lie, every plan, every word you spoke in the belief I wasn't listening. I pointed toward the door where 2 uniformed movers now waited. They're here for your things. You have 1 hour. Before I narrate what happens next, kindly let me know if you have any questions so far and why you haven't subscribed yet. Justin didn't move at first, like his brain had frozen somewhere between panic and denial. His mouth opened, but no sound came out, and for a moment I saw the man I'd married, except now he looked like a boy who got caught cheating on a group project. You can't be serious, he finally muttered, stepping back from the table as if the papers might catch fire. You're being dramatic, Kimberly. We can talk about this. I didn't answer him right away. Instead, I slid the next page across the table, a notarized breakdown of our joint assets, showing every account I had already separated and secured. His eyes scanned the figures, the reality sinking in like a knife slowly twisting. This is theft, he said, voice rising in pitch. No, I replied calmly. This is reclaiming what's mine before you and your entourage of mistresses and manipulators could take it. Heather burst through the door 15 minutes later, face red and voice already climbing. What do you think you're doing? She barked, pointing at the movers, now boxing up his monitors. I turned slowly, one hand resting on the signed lease reassignment form. You're trespassing, I said, and gestured to the doorman just outside in the hall who nodded at me like we'd practiced. You've got 10 minutes to leave before I have security escort you and your son out. She laughed, loud and brittle, like a villain in a community theater play. You're throwing away your marriage for what? Some high-paying job and self-respect? I didn't flinch. Yes, I said. Exactly that. Heather gaped at me like she'd just heard someone endorse witchcraft, and I swear I saw her blink twice like she wasn't used to being challenged. Justin tried one last time, stepping toward me with a forced smile. We don't have to do this, baby. Think about what you're doing. I looked him square in the eye, no fear, no trembling voice, just cold, surgical clarity. I have thought about it, Justin. Every time you lied to me, every time you kissed her belly while I was making your dinner, every time your mother said I wasn't enough and you let her. He froze mid-step, the weight of my words crushing whatever fantasy he'd built. I moved to the balcony window, pointing toward the street. Is that Emma? I asked, voice too sweet. Down below, a woman stood beside a rideshare car, visibly pregnant and texting furiously. Justin turned pale, the kind of pale that makes people reach for chairs. She can't come up, he mumbled. She thinks we're moving in together today. The laugh that came from my chest wasn't elegant. It was dark and real, and sharp enough to wound. Let her, I said. Let her see what she's inheriting. I grabbed my phone and hit record again, catching Justin's hands trembling as he backed away from the door. Please don't do this. You're ruining my life. I raised one eyebrow and pointed toward the suitcase of his I had packed and left by the elevator. Correction. I'm giving your life back to you. Unfiltered. Emma did come upstairs, eventually, escorted by building security after buzzing the wrong apartment twice. Her face fell the moment she saw me standing calmly in the hallway, clipboard in hand. You must be Emma, I said pleasantly. Justin's told me absolutely nothing. She looked between us, her eyes wide and confused. Wait, you're Kimberly? The very one, I replied. Wife, financial provider, target of a months-long removal plan orchestrated by him and his mother. Justin tried to interject, but Emma held up a hand, silencing him faster than I ever could. Is this true? She asked, eyes now burning. He didn't answer. Heather was already halfway down the hallway, muttering to herself about lawsuits that wouldn't land. Emma turned to leave, her face unreadable, her phone already out and typing something rapid-fire. I didn't follow. I didn't have to. I'd already won. I walked back into my apartment, the one I now legally occupied alone, and shut the door behind me with a finality that echoed like a gavel. The movers finished in silence, only pausing to confirm which electronics were mine. I signed the form, tipped them well, and watched as the last of Justin's presence vanished down the hallway. When the apartment fell silent, truly silent, I stood still in the center of the living room. I felt no urge to cry, no shaky breath, no weight pressing on my chest. Just air, open and unpolluted. The next morning, I changed the locks. I replaced the framed wedding photo with a canvas print of a wave crashing against cliffs. I deleted every joint playlist, unsubscribed him from my streaming accounts, and erased the fingerprint scan from the smart lock. Every small act felt like an exhale. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was restoration. I sent the final signed divorce petition to my lawyer that afternoon. Included was a signed affidavit from Heather's neighbor, who overheard her referring to me as disposable. There was also a financial audit showing Justin had used over $15,000 of marital funds for gifts, travel, and even prenatal care for a child that wasn't mine. The evidence was airtight, and even if he tried to contest it, I had digital receipts, legal counsel, and moral clarity on my side. That evening, I curled up on the couch with Thai takeout and a comedy special I'd missed during the chaos. My phone buzzed twice with unknown numbers. I didn't answer. Then it buzzed again with a name I hadn't seen in a while. Rebecca, sister. I answered immediately. Hey, I said I'd visit, but I think I need you to visit me instead. Say no more, she said. By the end of the week, Rebecca arrived with 2 bottles of wine, a bouquet of apology lilies, and a duffel bag full of snacks. You did the impossible, she said as she hugged me tight. You survived a gaslighting startup bro and his handmaid mother. I laughed so hard I snorted, and it felt like the first honest laugh in a long time. That night, we stayed up late watching terrible reality TV and burning old photos in a ceramic bowl on the balcony. One by one, we destroyed his wedding vows, his startup pamphlets, and a card he gave me that once read, "To the woman who makes me whole." The flames flickered and crackled, licking away the fiction of who he claimed to be. When the final ember died, I felt no grief, only gratitude that I hadn't waited a second longer to save myself. The next morning, Rebecca made blueberry pancakes in my kitchen, humming like we were back in our parents' house. I watched her move comfortably through my space, placing mugs just where I liked them, and folding the dish towel into thirds instead of halves. Feels weird, she said, sliding a plate toward me. Not having to walk on eggshells in here anymore. I nodded, grateful for her presence and even more grateful for the absence of Heather's judgmental glances. While we ate, she scrolled through social media and nearly choked on her coffee. Did you see this? She asked, turning her phone toward me. A Facebook post from Heather appeared, tagged at some coastal resort with a quote about healing after betrayal. I recognized the towel in the background. It was one I'd packed into Justin's bags. She's trying to play the victim, I said, shaking my head. Classic. We spent the afternoon updating my resume, not because I needed it, but because reclaiming every part of my life meant starting fresh. Rebecca insisted on deleting the section that mentioned my joint nonprofit work with Justin. He doesn't get to be on this page anymore, she said. This is your life, not your marriage obituary. Her words stuck with me long after she'd left. I wasn't mourning a divorce. I was celebrating an escape. Later that week, my lawyer called with news that the court had approved the expedited divorce proceedings. Due to the overwhelming evidence and uncontested documentation, the judge signed off on the separation and financial division with no hearing required. Justin hadn't even filed a response. He's probably still licking his wounds, my attorney said, chuckling. I thanked her, hung up, and sat quietly for a long minute, letting the finality settle like dust after demolition. I lit a candle and played my favorite jazz record, the one Justin always said made him feel antsy. The saxophone filled the room, sultry and slow, and I danced barefoot across the hardwood floor. No one told me to turn it down. No one rolled their eyes or retreated into another room. Just me, spinning and laughing in a space that finally felt mine. On Friday, I returned to the office with a confidence that made people pause in the hallway. Marie, my assistant, handed me my coffee with wide eyes. "Something's different," she said. "You're glowing." I smiled and nodded, not offering details because they didn't deserve my trauma. They deserved my triumph, and I wasn't going to shrink myself again for anyone. During the executive meeting, I presented a new strategy that streamlined operations and improved profit margins by 8%. The CFO gave me a rare nod of approval. Patricia leaned in afterward and whispered, "You're operating on another level lately. Whatever changed, keep it." I just smiled and closed my laptop, knowing the change wasn't just professional, it was personal reclamation. And it had been a long time coming. That weekend, I visited the apartment in Queens. It was the one Riley had supposedly been moving into, the one Justin toured and intended to co-sign. The property manager was kind but firm when I explained who I was. "He never signed the lease," she said. "Miss Riley came by once, very upset, said something about broken promises and vanishing bank transfers." I didn't need to ask more. It was clear Riley had discovered the same truths I had, just too late. She was probably another pawn in Justin's delusional empire building, a placeholder for the future he could never deliver. I felt a flicker of sympathy, but it passed. Anyone who calls your husband baby while he's still married isn't someone I could spend too long pitying. By Monday, I'd moved my name back to my maiden name, Kimberly Hart. The DMV clerk offered a bland smile as she handed me my new license. "Starting over?" she asked. "Starting correctly," I replied, tucking the card into my wallet. It was strange how good it felt, shedding a last name that had become synonymous with lies and manipulation. A week later, I got an email from an unknown sender. Subject line, "Closure." It was from Emma. Her message was brief but clear. I didn't know he was still married. "He told me you were separated. I'm sorry, I left him." I replied only once. "I hope your baby is safe and your future is your own." He doesn't know how to love anyone, not even himself. I didn't sign my name. I didn't need to. Some truths don't require repetition to remain powerful. Rebecca came back the following weekend, and we did something radical. We celebrated. We hosted a divorcee dinner party, complete with themed cocktails like Gaslight Gimlets and Freedom Fizz. We laughed until we cried, and then laughed some more, surrounded by friends who had witnessed the unraveling and the rise. For once, the attention wasn't about loss. It was about strength. Every toast was a promise to never go small again. The next day, I ran into Marcus at the farmer's market. He spotted me near the flowers and raised a hand, sheepish smile in place. "Hey, Kimberly," he said. "Didn't expect to see you here." I smiled, cool and distant. "Well, Marcus, you were wrong about a lot of things." He looked like he wanted to apologize, but I wasn't interested in apologies that only came after the dust settled. "I hope your sister-in-law enjoyed hosting the baby shower," I said, voice calm but pointed. His face turned red, and he looked down at the crate of avocados in his hand. "We didn't know how far it went." "You knew enough," I replied, "and now you get to live with that." He didn't follow me as I walked away. Didn't try to stop me or smooth things over with a forced smile and empty words, and for the first time, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. My story wasn't behind me anymore. It was ahead. The apartment had become a sanctuary now, one filled with soft light, no tension, and the kind of silence that comforts rather than accuses. I lit candles in the evening just because I liked the flicker, not to hide the smell of Heather's reheated cabbage. The couch felt bigger without Justin sprawling across it with his laptop and half-formed business ideas. I started reading again. Not reports or market trends, but novels, the kind with heroines who saved themselves. And for the first time in years, I slept through the night without waking to phantom anxiety about someone else's future. Word about the divorce spread quickly among our old social circle, though no one dared reach out directly except Jennifer. She sent a carefully worded text that started with, "I just want you to know I never meant to hurt you." I stared at it for a long time before typing a single reply. Intent doesn't erase complicity. She didn't answer after that, and I didn't expect her to. These were people who had chosen to stand around the table while I was being carved up. They didn't get to pretend shock now. At work, things accelerated in ways I hadn't anticipated. The VP role evolved into something more powerful. Patricia started looping me in on board strategy, and my influence grew with each quarter's numbers. I was building something real, something that didn't vanish when someone else got insecure. People started asking for my opinion like it carried weight, not just echo. And every time I sat at that table, I remembered how Justin said I was just shuffling PowerPoints. Mid-April, I received a certified letter forwarded from Justin's new address, his childhood home, of all places. Inside was a handwritten note from Heather, written in her looping, overly formal script. "You may think you've won, Kimberly, but a house built on spite won't stand long." I smiled and slid the letter into a drawer marked, "Delusions." If anyone knew about crumbling homes, it was the woman who tried to evict me from my own. I booked a weekend trip to Vermont by myself, something I used to fantasize about during the darkest months of my marriage. A quiet cabin with a fireplace, a view of the lake, and no cell service for miles. I took long walks, made French toast from scratch, and journaled like I was 15 again. Somewhere between hiking a mossy trail and spotting a fox in the underbrush, I realized something important. Healing wasn't a finish line, it was a direction, and I was finally walking toward it, not away. The Saturday I returned, a neighbor from 2 floors down stopped me in the lobby. "Did I hear right?" she asked. "Justin moved out?" I nodded, unsure how much she knew. "Let's just say the trash took itself out." She laughed so hard she nearly dropped her groceries. I kept Emma's email saved in a folder titled Evidence, though I no longer opened it. Sometimes I wondered how she was doing, if she kept the baby, if she ever confronted Heather directly. But I never reached out again. That chapter was closed, not erased, just closed. And I had no interest in inviting any of them into the new pages of my life. A few months later, my firm nominated me for a Women in Leadership Award. It wasn't something I applied for or even asked about. They just submitted my name with glowing recommendations. The gala was formal, black tie, and brimming with industry legends. When my name was called, I walked up to the podium in a navy satin gown with a slit that said I no longer dressed to make men comfortable. I gave a speech that was brief, fierce, and filled with gratitude. For mentors, for team members, and for myself. Back at my table, Patricia lifted her champagne glass and clinked mine gently. "You know," she said, "you've done more than bounce back. You've redefined what resilience looks like." I smiled at her, the kind of smile that only comes after watching everything burn and realizing you didn't need any of it to begin with. "I finally stopped waiting to be chosen," I said, "and started choosing myself." That night, I walked home instead of taking a car. The city lights shimmered around me like a celebration, and I let the cool air wrap around my bare shoulders. I passed the cafe where Justin and I had our second date and didn't even flinch. The ghost of who I used to be was still there, but she was just that, a ghost. I had no interest in resurrecting her. Later that week, I got an anonymous tip from a former colleague of Justin's. Apparently, he'd tried to pitch a new startup idea to a venture capital panel using my name as a character reference. Kimberly Hart and I developed the early strategic model, he had said, hoping no one would verify. But someone did, and they contacted me directly. I sent a cease and desist letter through my lawyer within the hour. He never responded, but I knew the message landed. You don't get to use the woman you tried to erase as your credibility stamp. You don't get to drag my name into your mess when you're the one who built it. Reputation, like trust, doesn't come on loan. It's earned. And he'd long since defaulted. Summer rolled in with warmth and clarity. I redecorated the apartment with bold colors and new furniture. No more beige, no more neutral tones. Heather swore were timeless. I bought a lemon tree for the balcony and named it Liberty. Every morning I watered it while sipping espresso from a bright yellow mug that read, CEO of my own damn life. And every time I took a sip, I smiled a little wider. Then came the final envelope, the one marked Judgment entered in all caps. Inside was the official divorce decree, stamped and sealed by the court. Kimberly Hart, single, solvent, unshaken. It felt less like an ending and more like an audit, verifying what I already knew, that I had survived. I framed the divorce decree and placed it on a small shelf in my hallway, right beneath a print that said, "She remembered who she was, and the game changed." It wasn't to celebrate the ending, it was to honor the survival. Every signature on that document had been earned through grit, silence, and strategy. I passed it each morning on my way out the door, never stopping to stare but always acknowledging it with a small breath. It was the quiet kind of victory, the kind that never needed applause to be real. Around the same time, Rebecca started dating someone new. His name was Leo, a civil engineer with kind eyes and a laugh that made even me soften around the edges. They visited often, and the three of us would eat on the balcony with string lights flickering above our heads like summer fireflies. "You don't flinch anymore when we talk about love," she said one night, sipping red wine from a glass I'd bought on clearance the week after Justin left. "That's how I know you're healing." I didn't deny it. There was something different in the way I reacted to affection now. More curiosity, less armor. I wasn't rushing toward or away from anything. I was just present. And for the first time in a decade, I didn't feel like a placeholder in someone else's plan. Then, one morning in late August, I received a message request on LinkedIn from Emma. The profile photo showed her holding a baby, her hair tied back and her eyes a little darker than I remembered. The message itself was brief. "Thank you for what you did." He told me everything eventually. "I've moved back with my parents. We're okay now." I stared at the screen for a long time before closing the tab without replying. It wasn't that I felt superior or bitter. I just had nothing left to give her. She was part of the storm, even if she hadn't seen the clouds forming above her. We both deserved peace now, just not together. I wished her healing, but from a distance. Boundaries, I'd learned, weren't walls. They were gates I got to control. In early September, I was invited to speak at a women's leadership conference in Chicago. The topic was strategic self-preservation, building your future while others try to tear it down. I knew exactly why they'd picked me. My reputation at work had grown into something that people admired quietly, an undercurrent of strength wrapped in calm delivery. I stood on stage in a crisp white blazer and told my story, not as a victim but as a strategist who had learned to listen between the lies. Afterward, a woman in the audience approached me with tears in her eyes. "Your story was mine," she whispered. "Except I didn't fight back in time." I held her hand and looked her in the eye. "It's never too late to come home to yourself." She nodded, and we stood there in silence for a moment, surrounded by women who knew what it meant to rebuild from rubble. That evening, I returned to my hotel room and poured myself a glass of water with lime. The skyline shimmered outside the window, like possibility itself. I sat down at the desk and opened my journal, the one with receipts taped between the pages and affirmations scribbled in the margins. I flipped past every page that mentioned Justin, until I reached the clean ones at the back. There, I wrote one sentence. "This isn't survival anymore. It's sovereignty." In the weeks that followed, my life felt almost unrecognizable from what it had been a year ago. I took salsa classes on Wednesdays, joined a professional mentorship circle, and signed up for cooking lessons just because I wanted to. There were no more whispered apologies for staying late at work or spending my own money. No more side eyes across the dinner table. No more edited versions of myself. Just Kimberly Hart, in full form, no footnotes. Then, in the middle of October, I walked past a bookstore and saw a man I hadn't thought about in months. Justin. He was standing outside, handing out flyers for a tech event that looked like it was being hosted in a co-working basement. His clothes were rumpled, and his hair looked like it hadn't met a comb in days. Our eyes met for just a moment. His widened. Mine didn't even blink. I kept walking. He called out my name once, softly, but I didn't stop. I didn't speed up either. I let him watch me move forward, because nothing I could say would teach him what that silence already screamed. Behind me was the man who tried to erase me. Ahead of me was everything else. That night, I told Rebecca about it over FaceTime. She tilted her head and said, "Did you feel anything?" I thought for a second and replied, "Like when you pass a store that used to sell something you liked, but now it's boarded up?" She grinned and raised her glass. "Then you're good." Halloween came, and I handed out candy in a cat costume with fake ears and a tail. The kids from my building squealed with delight, and one of the moms told me, "We're so glad you stayed." I smiled and handed her son a mini Snickers bar. "Me too," I said. "This place finally feels like home." November settled in with shorter days and colder nights, but I didn't feel the chill the way I used to. My apartment stayed warm with the smell of spiced candles and the sound of jazz or podcasts, depending on my mood. I started waking up earlier, not because I had to, but because I wanted to savor my mornings. There was no one rushing past me, no one criticizing my outfits or asking why the eggs weren't runny enough, just me, moving at the pace of my own choosing. The office holiday party approached, and for the first time in years I didn't dread it. I wore a deep emerald dress that fit like it was made for me, paired with the gold pendant I used to keep in a drawer because Justin said it was too flashy. Marie caught sight of me as I entered the ballroom and whispered, "If confidence was a color, that'd be it." I laughed, genuinely, and raised my glass to her. That night, I danced, not with a partner, but with my colleagues, my friends, and most importantly, myself. Halfway through the night, Patricia pulled me aside near the dessert table. "I spoke to the board," she said, voice low but firm. "We'd like you to take on a dual role, VP of Strategy and Head of Innovation." I blinked, stunned, and managed to say, "I'm honored." She smiled. "You're more than honored, Kimberly. You've earned every inch of this." Back at home, I poured a glass of wine and sat on the couch in my heels, still glowing. I thought about the woman who used to shrink inside herself when Justin walked into a room. I remembered how often I'd second-guessed my wins because he made them feel like losses. Now, I understood what real power looked like. It wasn't loud or forceful. It was steady, unshaken, and rooted in truth. A few days later, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a plain manila envelope with one thing inside: a photo of Justin holding a baby, the child maybe 4 or 5 months old, dressed in a yellow onesie. I stared at it, not sure what emotion was supposed to rise. Regret didn't come, neither did jealousy, just relief. Relief that I wasn't the one carrying the weight of his unfinished growing up. Relief that, no matter how many new families he tried to form, none would come from deception with me. I slid the photo into a box, marked past lives, and put it back in my closet. I had no need to destroy it, but no desire to revisit it either. Thanksgiving came, and Rebecca hosted this year in her new apartment across town. Leo cooked most of the meal, and I brought dessert, my grandmother's apple pie recipe, perfected at last. "It smells like childhood," Rebecca said, wrapping her arms around me in the kitchen. I smiled, brushing a tear off my cheek before it could fall. "It smells like freedom." After dinner, we played charades and laughed until our sides ached. It was the first Thanksgiving in 8 years where I wasn't sitting at a table with people pretending to like me. No Heather commenting on my weight. No Justin correcting my version of shared memories. No pretending. Just chosen family and food that tasted like love. December arrived with its usual chaos, but this time it didn't rattle me. I hosted a small gathering at my place. Mulled wine, cookies, simple decorations, and invited only people who made me feel whole. As we toasted by the tiny faux fireplace I bought at a holiday market, Marie turned to me and said, "You know what's wild? I've never seen someone lose everything and come back with more." I smiled, lifting my glass. I didn't lose everything. I let go of what was never mine to begin with. A week before Christmas, I got another message, this time from Marcus. He asked if I'd be open to a conversation, just the two of us, no sides. I didn't reply at first. I sat with it, let it linger like smoke in a room you've already aired out. Then I deleted the message without answering. I owed him nothing. He had his chance to speak up when it mattered, and he stayed silent. Silence is a choice too, and choices come with consequences. The door he stood in front of was no longer mine. It had been sealed shut with truth and time. New Year's Eve approached, and with it came a final, unexpected invitation from a mentor in San Francisco offering a guest spot on a leadership panel. I booked a flight and packed a carry-on, this time without asking anyone's permission or leaving a note. I stood on that stage overlooking a skyline I once dreamed of working in, and spoke not just of strategy but of self-preservation. "Sometimes," I told the audience, "the best business decision you'll ever make is refusing to be managed by someone else's fear." The applause was loud, but the quiet nods meant more. When I landed back in New York, I didn't rush. I took a cab home, letting the city move around me without urgency, the way it always had for those who knew where they were going. The apartment glowed softly through the windows as I approached. My lights, my furniture, my sanctuary. I unlocked the door, dropped my coat on the hook, and stood in the center of the living room. I exhaled deeply, not from exhaustion, but from gratitude. That night, as fireworks lit up the sky outside, I didn't make any resolutions. I didn't need to promise myself anything new. I'd already done the impossible. I had walked out of a burning building carrying only the truth and built a new life from ashes. And now, with the clock striking midnight, I poured a glass of champagne, raised it to the mirror, and whispered, "Happy New Me." The reflection smiled back, and for the first time in years, I recognized her. The first week of January rolled in quietly, like a page turning in a novel that no longer made me anxious to read ahead. I no longer looked over my shoulder, waiting for another betrayal to sneak up behind me. That part of my story was over, and every morning felt like proof that peace didn't have to be dramatic. It just had to be real. I drank coffee in silence, journaled without editing, and wore lipstick even when I wasn't going anywhere. My life had become mine again, not rented out to someone else's ambition or insecurity. At work, the strategy deck I'd developed in December landed us 3 new high-profile clients. Patricia called me into her office and offered me something I hadn't expected so soon, an equity stake in the firm. "You've become more than just essential," she said, sliding the papers toward me. "You've become irreplaceable." I blinked once, nodded, and signed, because I wasn't afraid of power anymore. That night, I walked home in heels that clicked against the pavement like applause. The cold bit at my cheeks, but I didn't rush inside. I stopped by the flower stand near the corner bodega and picked out a bundle of yellow tulips. When I placed them in the vase at home, I realized it was the same one I'd used for Justin's good luck flowers years ago. Only this time, I wasn't sending them to support someone else's future. I was celebrating my own. Later that week, I received a voicemail from an unknown number. The voice was unmistakable. Justin, sounding like someone who'd aged 10 years in 6 months. "I heard about the award and the firm. I wanted to say you were always better than me. I'm sorry, Kimberly, I mean that." I deleted the message without saving it, not because I was angry, but because it wasn't meant for me. It was meant for his guilt. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he couldn't control the ending. February brought quiet weekends and warmer light in the mornings. Rebecca and Leo got engaged, and I helped her pick out her dress without once thinking about how mine had never been worn again. "You seem so free," she told me, twirling in front of a mirror in a boutique that smelled like jasmine and tulle. "Like even your laughter changed." I smiled, adjusting the strap on her gown. "Turns out, when you stop making yourself small, your voice gets louder." One afternoon, while organizing some old files, I came across a crumpled sticky note buried in the back of my desk drawer. It had been folded and shoved there in a rush. One of the first notes I'd written myself after the fake firing, back when I still felt like I was breaking. It read, "Don't flinch. Don't fold. Don't forget who you are." I held it between my fingers for a long time, then stuck it to the back of my closet door. It stayed there like a monument, quietly reminding me of everything I'd made it through. By spring, the apartment had changed again. Brighter throw pillows, new art, fresh energy. Marie came over for brunch one Sunday and blinked at the space. "It looks like a completely different place," she said, buttering her toast. I nodded, sipping grapefruit juice from a glass with tiny painted lemons. "It feels like one too, because it wasn't just furniture that had shifted. It was me." Justin's name came up one last time that season, in the most unexpected way. A client mentioned a tech guy working customer service at an old firm that had rebranded and downsized. "Said he used to be some kind of founder," the client mused. "Bit of a know-it-all, if I'm honest." I simply smiled and turned the conversation back to our quarterly goals. That chapter was so distant now, it felt like a story I'd read in someone else's book. On the 1-year anniversary of my fake firing, the moment that had started it all, I treated myself to dinner at the same steakhouse I'd once booked for that marketing team event Justin mocked. I made a reservation for one and wore the same dress I'd picked out for that night, but never got to wear. The maitre d' complimented the cut, and the waiter never asked if I was waiting for anyone. I ordered the filet, medium rare, and paired it with a glass of red so expensive past me would have hesitated. This version of me? She didn't hesitate at all. Halfway through the meal, I glanced out the window and saw my reflection in the glass. Not the outline of a woman who'd been broken, but the profile of someone who had reforged herself from the ruins. My jawline didn't sag with sorrow anymore, and my eyes didn't scan for danger. I wasn't watching my back, I was watching my future unfold. I took a photo of the empty seat across from me and captioned it. Peace takes up space too. I didn't post it online or send it to anyone. I just saved it. It was for me, a reminder that solitude wasn't something to fear. It was something to toast. In the cab home, I felt no ache in my chest, no echo of loss. The city passed me by like it was saluting me. The buildings, the lights, the people I once tried to keep up with. None of them owned me anymore. I belonged to no one but myself, and that was more than enough. As spring turned to summer again, I signed the lease on a second property, an airy little place in Hudson where I could disappear when the city got too loud. It had white shutters, a garden I planned to plant myself, and a reading nook by the window. I called it the Reclamation House. Rebecca helped me furnish it, and we laughed every time we picked something Justin would have hated. There wasn't a single compromise in the entire space. On move-in day, I poured champagne into mismatched glasses and clinked hers. To every woman who got told she was too much, I said, and to every woman who was told she wasn't enough, she smiled and added, and to the ones who realized they were never the problem. We drank until the stars came out, and I went to sleep that night wrapped in linen sheets, with no ghosts in the hallway and no lies in the air. In the morning, I woke up to birdsong and sunlight cutting across the wooden floor like gold. I padded barefoot into the kitchen, made coffee, and sat at the window in my robe. No plan, no performance, just breath, warmth, and the soft pulse of a life that finally belonged to me. Thank you for listening to Kimberly's story. If you're yet to subscribe, please consider doing so before watching another story on the channel.